Yakov, thank you. Thanks for that kind introduction. It's great to be with you all this afternoon. I know you've had the former director of Mossad, you've had the former ambassador, now me. We'll have a good time today, and I'm looking forward to taking questions in a bit. But a couple thoughts now, a few months removed from being America's Secretary of State. You should know that the United States' support of Israel is an expression, in my heart, of American patriotism. It demonstrates our ability to recognize and defend our own democratic interests and values with absolute moral clarity. This country, Israel, teaches us that we can not long remain a land of the free if we do not proactively make sure to be a home truly of the brave. Our Jewish friends are not alone, and our interests in supporting Israel are one and the same. Our alliance enhances each of our two countries and all of the free world around us as well. As we all know, a concerted campaign is being waged against the world's one and only Jewish country, attacking virtually every aspect of its historic, legal, political, cultural life, with the singular aim of undermining the sovereignty, security, and legitimacy of Israel's existence. The future of our nations demands a more forceful assertion of the truth than at a level that we have not seen spoken about or witnessed. In Israel's case, it specifically involves confronting a false narrative that is the very beating heart of modern anti-Semitism. That beating heart is the lie. It is the lie that the state of Israel is an illegal occupier in the land of Israel. The lie of occupation. The lie of occupation provides Israel's enemies a means to explain away all types of aggression and violence as merely resistance to the occupation. Just listen to what they have to say in their public rhetoric. Given the negative connotation of the term occupier, anti-Semitic groups around the world use the word as often as possible in their messaging as they carry out acts of cultural, political, and economic warfare upon Israel and its supporters. Occupier, occupier. This then leads to the term's casual repetition by the media and its eventual use by policymakers as well. This presents real risk. It is clear then that promoting the common misrepresentation of the Jewish state of Israel as an occupier in the land of Israel has become the primary anti-Semitic canard of the present generation. The bottom line is that occupation is a legal term whose definition does not apply to the state of Israel under the law. Nevertheless, the term is intentionally misused, and it's important that we know this. It is intentionally misused in order to shape negative misperceptions of Israel's history and of its legitimacy, while perpetuating a sense of Arab victimhood. In this very same context, occupier is nothing more than a polite way of calling Israel a thief. It goes hand in hand with the denial and erasure of Jewish history through international institutions such as the United Nations. To Christians, of course, this means that if the two Jewish temples never stood on the Mount in Jerusalem, then Christ and his works are then equally invalidated. One of the things I worked on hardest as my time as America's Secretary of State was to set that record straight, to clarify all the chaos that had been sown. You should know that the situation I inherited at the State Department was a policy mess that had been festering since the time of the Carter administration, based on ignoring inconvenient legal history. You know, as Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, not from my party, put it, a person is entitled to his own opinion, but not to his own facts. And so I told my team at the State Department to conduct a strict factual and legal review and policy analysis, which then formed the basis of our policy stance. In practical terms, this ultimately meant confronting the lie of occupation with the truth that Israel exists within its present territory with full legal title and sovereign legitimacy as a matter of international law. I'm honored this position has become popularly known as the Pompeo Doctrine. It's a legal, it's not my idea. It is a legal historical record that undergirds this doctrine. It's the following. It's following World War I, the Ottoman Empire ceded control over portions of the empire to Allied powers, who then, through the League of Nations, carried out an act of binding international law that vested title in the Jewish people to reestablish their national home in the ancestral homeland, the place we sit today. The United States specifically recognized this right. Their Congressional Joint Resolution. This is law. It was signed by President Warren G. Harding back in 1922. That was followed by the Anglo-American Convention on Palestine in December of 1924 and proclaimed by President Calvin Coolidge after him in 1925. Later, the United Nations followed. It incorporated this act of international law into what's known as Article 80 of its own charter. This was the legal predicate for the establishment of the modern Jewish state of Israel. And this title, Title 80, has not been and cannot be superseded by any subsequent purported legal document at the UN. No resolution aiming to annul it or rescind the rights granted to the Jewish people over the former mandate of Palestine can be upheld. And again, I want to come back to the bottom line. The bottom line is that Israel is not indeed an occupier. The legal and factual basis for its right to be here is clear. The hundreds of thousands of Jews and Christians who call Judea and Samaria and Eastern Jerusalem home have a perfectly legitimate right to live there in safety under Israeli sovereignty. Now, we've all lived this last years, we've seen for the last century that dispossessing Jews of title, sovereignty, and self-defense of its territory has served a common cause among too many different anti-Semitic ideologues and appeasers. That cause, of course, ultimately depends upon denying Jews their religious and national history and identity. This necessarily presents correlating questions to Christians about our religious genesis and has taken shape in the absurd denial of Judeo-Christian heritage in its obviously indigenous ancestral homeland here in Israel. Sadly, the current administration in the United States is returning to this false principle that the Jewish state of Israel is an illegal occupier. I want them to say, not so fast. We demand to hear fully, for them to substantiate their assertion that Israel is an occupier as a matter of law and historical fact. Fight this on reason and law and fact. We want a legitimate discourse on policy, not a bunch of name-calling rhetoric that anti-Semitic squads like to throw around. To that end, I've suggested that Congress be presented a bill that lays out this doctrine as a matter of U.S. law and of historical fact. You should know that my understanding is the understanding of peoples around the world who understand the law and the facts. As a former soldier, if history teaches anything, it is that policies of appeasement are always destined to fail, and American weakness engenders risk to all of us, Americans and Israelis and people in the Gulf region all around. Over the last century, nothing has served this region more thoroughly than a strong relationship between the United States and Israel. I pray that this exchange, this effort, this cooperation will continue. It's in the best interest of Israel, it's in best interest of the Gulf states, and it is deeply in the best interest of the United States of America. Thank you for giving me the chance to be here with you all today.
We're going to sit down. Thank you very much, Secretary Pompeo.
Here? Great, here we go. This looks great.
So it was great to have you. I'm curious, Yossi Cohen, who was on stage, and you guys overlapped a bit back when you were at CIA and then also as Secretary of State, spoke about how the Iranian nuclear threat, yes, of course, it's dire, it's very severe, but it's not around the corner. It's not about to happen. Everything that some people have been saying that it's all failed and the Trump pullout and withdrawal from the JCPOA, that whole idea did not work out. Did it in the end? I mean, they're pursuing, they still have more enriched uranium, but on the other hand, are we in a better place? Are we in a worse place?
Yeah, there's no doubt that the policies that we adopted made Israel, the United States, and the world safer from the Iranian regime. I am as certain of that as I am sitting with you here today, Yaakov. We denied them resources. In the end, nuclear weapons program take a handful of things, one of which is the capacity to do the work, the scientific knowledge, the infrastructure that goes with it, all of the money it takes to build out a nuclear weapons program. The JCPOA, this nuclear deal, was nuts. It guaranteed a pathway for the Iranians to ultimately develop a nuclear weapon. You need only take a look at a handful of the documents that a great, wonderful Israeli mission conducted outside of Tehran that shows the Iranian intent to continue to build out its nuclear weapons program. We denied them the capacity to build out their Shia militias in Iraq. We denied them resources. Hezbollah soldiers were making a fraction of the pay that they were making when the Trump administration came into office. We had denied them the ability to build out a Gulf-threatening capability. And, you know, this administration says they want to re-enter the deal longer, better, stronger. Godspeed. I wanted longer, I wanted better, and I wanted much, much stronger. And I am convinced, had we had another 12 months or 24 months, that together the United States and Israel would have been able to deliver on that.
Do you think that we'll find ourselves in a place that military action is the last resort? That's what Israel's done it in 2007, did it in 1981. Can Israel do it again?
This is the risk of appeasement. The risk of appeasement is you embolden your adversaries, and ultimately they put nations in the place where they're stuck with only one tool, a military tool. This is not in the best interest of anyone. I pray that we do not force Israel into a really difficult decision one day, but I pray even more than that. I pray that if it is the case that something like that has to happen, if the world must deny the Iranians a nuclear weapon, that the United States will be part of making sure that that happens. We were intent on it. We were prepared to do it. The strike on Qasem Soleimani demonstrated our willingness to defend American interests around the world, and I'm confident that the work that we were engaged in would have prevented Iran from getting a nuclear weapon in a way that I hope doesn't have to end up resorting to a military option.
So if I'm reading between the lines, had you remained in office and the negotiations did not work, is it possible that we would have seen military action on behalf of the Trump administration?
I think you've just laid out a hypothetical on top of a hypothetical. Okay. But make no mistake about it. But make no mistake about it. You only need to go to President Trump's Twitter account. We were never going to let Iran get a nuclear weapon on our watch.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you, just a few steps from here, is the annex, I think it's called, of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, what's on Agron Street, the embassy, that's part of the embassy.
I'm very familiar with it,
And then there's the other embassy. I think you know these buildings probably better than most people. There's talk now of opening a consulate in Jerusalem that would serve or represent the Palestinian people. Your thoughts on that?
It's a terrible idea. It's a terrible idea for the United States. It's a terrible idea for Israel, and it's a bad idea for the Palestinian people as well. Two other thoughts. It's illegal under U.S. law. We just, as a rule, when we recognize nations, we have an embassy. We don't place a consulate in the same city. It's a rule that we have. Most nations have the same rule. But second, the message that this would send to the Palestinian leaders who continue to oppress their own people is really bad. We want good things for the Palestinian people, right? We do. But here's what we don't want. We don't want to mislead them into thinking that the United States is somehow neutral between a country like Israel, a democracy like Israel, and an oppressive, kleptocratic regime like the regime that's running the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank today.
So talking about the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, is Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, is he a partner for peace? Right now, this government in Jerusalem, led by Naftali Bennett's not talking to him really.
Yeah.
Is he a partner?
No, of course not. I don't know what else to say.
So
I pray.
How can that change?
As a Christian, I pray that it will change. That he will see a way clear to understand that it's in the best interest of his people to engage in a conversation with Israel. But he's all about no, and he's all about no because it's deeply self-interested for him. And I spent a fair amount of time with him. I always urged him to have the conversation. The only way you get to resolution of this conflict is through dialogue and conversation. It's going to be very fraught and very difficult, and there are some incredibly complex, difficult issues. But you can't resolve them by urging your people to threaten intifada when things don't go your way. And you can see the Abraham Accords are a demonstrable path forward that every people in this region can choose. Israel is a nation of peace. We're in Jerusalem, for goodness sakes. Right. This is a nation of peace. The Palestinian people can have better lives as well. The Israelis that I spoke to and the leadership were perfectly prepared to do everything they could to make sure they had better lives as well. You simply can't have a set of leaders that are so deeply connected to a corrupt regime and who have no interest in creating this peace.
Two last short questions. Number one is, you had that visit, I think it was to the city of Nome in Saudi Arabia. Prime Minister Netanyahu, I think Yossi Cohen was there. You were there, apparently. This is according to reports. What was that meeting like? And how close were we to normalizing ties with the Saudis?
So you are a great interviewer. I can neither confirm nor deny anyone's presence in Nome that evening. The second question I can actually address. I am convinced that there will be multiple nations who come to see that it is the appropriate thing to do to recognize Israel as the rightful Jewish homeland and the state of Israel as a partner in peace and stability and prosperity. I don't know when the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia will make that decision. It does take American leadership. America had, these were agreements between sovereign nations, but America's role in this was central. That we weren't guarantors for the agreement, but our good offices were very beneficial to helping these leaders get to the place where they could make the brave and bold decisions that they did to recognize Israel. We did it not once, not twice, but 4 times in the course of 120 days. And I am convinced that not only the people of Israel, the people of each of those nations can see the benefits that are flowing to them already from a security and prosperity standpoint, and that these will stand the test of history and the world will be better for it.
And just finally, Secretary, Jerusalem, as you know, is an ancient city which has made history through millennia. It's a place where announcements are sometimes made. And I'm just curious if there's no better stage than right now to tell us your plans for the coming years, where we might see you in 2024.
I am happy to talk about my plans. I am going to continue the fight for freedom all across the world.
Secretary Pompeo, it was great to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bless you. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.